Welcome to Cybersecurity Sense, a weekly podcast providing updates and insight into the latest in cybersecurity, brought to you by LBMC Information Security. Now, here's your host.
Hi, I'm Bill Dean, shareholder here at LBMC Information Security. Thank you so much for joining us again, and we hope that you enjoy this content as much as the previous content. As in the past, we will again have a special guest on based on their expertise. For this episode, our guest will be Chelsea Smith from our audit and attestation practice. Before we get into the topic, we're going to talk about the impact of what remote work has really done for our IT audits. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this has definitely been an issue. I want to thank you, Chelsea, so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Do you mind to take a minute or so and maybe introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on today. As you said, my name is Chelsea Smith, and I have been with LBMC Information Security for a little over 3 years now. LBMC introduced me to information security as an intern and really inspired me to pursue a career that would have otherwise probably been financial audit. Currently, I primarily work on SOC and high trust service lines, but I do have experience in some of our other offerings as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I guess I'm really pleased that you chose to work in information security instead of audit. So being selfish, we're definitely glad that you made that choice. So you work in our SOC practice. I'm assuming that's SOC and SOC 2, and then some high trust. Do you do any SOCs by chance, SOX?
I do have some experience in SOCs. I do not work in SOCs primarily, but I do support some of our staff that work on those projects.
That's great to hear. And again, thank you for joining us. Our work is much cooler than most of the audit and tax stuff. So for what that's worth. So again, thank you. You recently published a blog post. Actually, it's on the website now. It's titled The Impact of Remote Work on IT Attestation Audits. That's definitely going to be in the show notes, but that's been a really big deal because part of the controls that you're having to check require being on site and doing things from a physical perspective that you can't always do remotely. So how has that transition to the predominant remote work that we're doing now impacted, not only how we perform our attest engagements, but what's the impact been on for the client?
Right. So, typically we perform our attestation engagements on-site and in person. There's several reasons for this. First and foremost, we like to meet with our clients. They often have many questions about the engagement, including questions on compliance and maybe changes in requirements. So there's a lot of questions that we like to answer. And I feel like clients feel more comfortable asking those questions when we're in person. It also allows us to show our overall knowledge and expertise in the area. Next, many of our attestation engagements typically require an on-site visit. So depending on the engagement, much of the work may be expected to be completed on-site. And lastly, like you said, it's very easy to perform those physical observations when we're on site. So even though there's many reasons to be on site for these engagements, that's not always possible, especially given our current circumstances with COVID-19. Many of our clients have strictly limited the individuals that are allowed into their facilities, with some facilities closing altogether. But luckily, we have some technology and tools that allow us to continue to perform these types of engagements with little impact to the overall assessment. We're increasing our remote work and using tools like WebEx, Skype, and Zoom in order to perform video conferencing and to share screens. This allows us to have nearly the same experience as an in-person interaction. And our team also uses other communication tools such as Slack. We create these channels, is what they're called, and we make those specific to each engagement. This allows us to communicate questions and clarifications and status and really helps us work together as a team. I'd say the area that has been most impacted is our ability to perform those observations of the physical components that contribute to the controls within a client's environment. However, we're usually able to obtain evidence by modifying our test procedures. This can include a number of different methods, from performing observations via video conference to examining camera footage and maybe even looking at installation and maintenance documentation that's available. So it really depends on the controls that we're evaluating. But so far, we've been pretty successful at obtaining what we need to evaluate the effectiveness of a control. So overall, I'd say our impact on our day-to-day has been pretty minimal, and we're still continuing to stay busy because our clients still need to meet those regulatory and contractual obligations.
That's great. Thank you. And you mentioned we are a high touch professional services firm. We want to be in front of our clients as much as possible. And realizing this is impacting a lot of the controls and how we conduct business usually, which controls do you feel are most impacted by the work from home situation that we're in now? You mentioned the physical. Are there others? And realizing you do a lot of interviews, are those virtual? Kind of how are we dealing with that?
So it really depends on the client, and it also depends on the controls. You asked what types of controls. For instance, a fire suppression system, that's an environmental control as opposed to a physical security control. Usually we would see if that fire suppression system is actually in place. So we can say that a client has that in place. So instead of actually physically observing that, we can obtain installation records, we can obtain maintenance records in order to see that it is in place and was at least recently functional. Additionally, when clients can access their facilities, we can use those video conferences in order to perform an observation on those video conferences.
Perfect. Thank you. And so, obviously, the sizable team that you work on, you folks work to accomplish the attestation goals for numerous accreditation bodies. And this is where it gets a little bit spicy, for lack of a better term. Overall, how's the AICPA kind of advising clients on how to proceed with SOC and SOC 2? And if you don't mind, just give a quick overview of AICPA because a lot of our audience are more on that technical side. Kind of tell us what the AICPA is and how they're kind of providing guidance for SOC and SOC 2 engagements.
So, the AICPA is a body that gives information on how to approach financial audits and SOC audits, SOC 2 audits of that nature. And the way that they've responded to this is that they've created a COVID-19 resource center, and that link is included in my blog. This landing page has a number of resources, including a section dedicated to audit and assurance. So they continue to post new information, but currently the guidance they've given around SOC reports specifically is that companies should expect delays, and they outline some information on how companies can respond to these delays. However, LBMC continues to perform our SOC engagements remotely. We do not expect delays as a result of the pandemic, and we continue to work with our clients and adapt to meet their compliance needs relative to SOC reports.
Perfect. Thank you. So, High Trust, you work in that practice somewhat. That is one of our fastest growing practices for a lot of different reasons. So, AICPA is one, guidance body, if you will, as to how to conduct these audits. What's High Trust telling us compared to the others?
Right. So, High Trust typically requires an on-site visit for validated assessments. But right now, they've temporarily waived that requirement in response to COVID-19 and its effects on businesses. So we've adjusted our testing procedures accordingly, and we're doing that by performing our assessments remotely. So High Trust also released some alternate testing procedures. So typically when we're performing a High Trust engagement, they have illustrative procedures that we're required to follow in order to evaluate a High Trust requirement. So many of these procedures specify to observe that a requirement is in place, but High Trust took a list of those requirements that required observations, and then they provided example documentations or other procedures that could be performed in place of that observation. So High Trust did specify that it is still necessary to obtain sufficient and appropriate evidence in order to receive a fully compliant score. Now, one interesting thing that High Trust did not do is they did not adjust the requirements of an assessment. So, for example, a company is required to get a recertification 2 years from that initial certification. So they didn't move due dates, but they did develop something called a bridge assessment. And this bridge assessment allows an organization to maintain their certification status for an additional 90 days after that certification due date. So there's still a lot of requirements and qualifications in order to obtain a high trust CSF bridge certificate, but it's a great option for companies who are struggling to meet their deadlines as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you for that. And the bridge assessment, again, I don't do a lot in the audit side and in high trust, but the bridge assessment was kind of new to some of the shareholders. I think that's as of like 3 weeks ago. So we're definitely working to develop an offering to help our clients through that. So thank you for bringing that up. Realize you work on high trust and SOC. We also do some ISO. You may or may not be involved heavily in that practice line, but I'm assuming that they're probably now providing some type of guidance as to how they can do their accreditation. Do you have any thoughts on what maybe they're suggesting? And, typically my rule of thumb is most attestation and audit frameworks, it's 85-15. 85% of these frameworks are asking for the same things. 15% of it is specific to the industry. And I'm assuming when it comes to a lot of this guidance that they're providing, it's probably going to be very similar. But, I did want to break down 3 or 4 of our major attestation practices just to see if there's any differences. So when it comes to ISO, what have you seen there? Even though you're not working in that practice, I'm sure that you're paying attention to it.
Right, exactly. You're right. Many of the requirements across these different service lines are similar. What's interesting about ISO is that ISO accreditors typically only allow 30% of an audit to be conducted remotely. And this is very different from our other service lines. So recent guidance that they've provided allows audits to be performed virtually or to be postponed. So if a company decides to go ahead with a virtual remote audit, their timeline shouldn't be impacted, but this isn't possible for all organizations. So organizations should definitely work very closely with their certifying body to determine the best way forward for their specific environment.
Chelsea, thank you so much for all that information thus far. Realizing you don't work a lot in the PCI practice, but as we've kind of discussed, audits, follow similar types of controls. PCI is probably our leading practice, just from a size and a revenue perspective, because we've been doing it for so long. What have you seen that they're suggesting, maybe compared to ISO and high trust and SOC? Do you see any differences there, or is it very common as to what the guidance is thus far?
So PCI hasn't released a lot of guidance relative to COVID-19. They had already issued guidance relating to performing remote assessments. So at this time, they've referred back to that existing guidance amidst the pandemic. So in a nutshell, they leave it up to QSAs to determine if remote procedures are appropriate, but indicate that the QSA should be able to adequately document and defend the procedures that are performed.
Perfect. And that's common as to how they address a lot of stuff. So it sounds like a lot of these frameworks are somewhat similar. They realize they probably weren't expecting this like everyone else. No one was expecting to conduct business this way. So we have to make this needed adjustments. We just want to be sure that our clients are going to get what they need in the time frame that they needed. And thank you so much for all the information. And I'm sure the listeners have really gotten a great deal of value, regardless as to what risk assessment or what audit framework that they may be in. So, one question, when things get back to normal, and who knows what normal is going to look like when we're done with this, how do you think things will change long term from an attestation and an audit perspective? Will it go back to business as usual? Do you think it'll be a hybrid between then and now? Or kind of what are your thoughts there?
So I think that this is forcing many companies to take a new approach to a lot of the ways we conduct business day to day. And companies may decide to expand remote work as they become more comfortable with the technology that allows us to continue to provide effective results. And I also think that regulatory and accreditation bodies will continue to expand on remote working procedures as they see the need to adjust to these new work environments.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for your expertise. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Only thoughts of goodwill. I know that many of those listening have been impacted in one way or another by COVID-19. I feel very fortunate to be able to continue to work from home. My biggest impact is conducting these assessments while my kids are out of school. But I realize that regulatory and contractual burdens may be the furthest from people's minds right now, but we're always here to help in any way possible.
Thank you. And when I speak to colleagues often during the day, whether it's within our practice or even our clients, they're like, well, how's everything going? I'm like, I love to work from home. What I don't like is having to work from home. So it's kind of a different type of approach to it. But at some point, things are going to get back to somewhat normal. We don't know what that's going to look like, but I think that the workforce and how we deliver business and conduct business is just going to be different. So thank you so much, Chelsea. For everyone listening, thank you. Please tune in next time for our next episode. As always, if you have a particular topic that you'd like to hear about in this podcast, please do not hesitate to contact me. Send me an email at bdean@lbmc.com. To learn more about LBMC Information Security and the services that we provide, please visit lbmcsecurity.com and have a great and safe week. Thank you.